3 True Horror Stories of American Beach Houses. Story 1. The Forgotten Guests of Myrtle Beach. The relentless summer sun beat down on Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, shimmering off the endless expanse of the Atlantic. It was July 2025, and Sarah Brooks, a 35-year-old single mother and real estate agent from Charlotte, North Carolina, felt a desperate need for a vacation. Her son, Liam Brooks, a quiet but imaginative 12-year-old, had been begging for a beach trip, and Sarah, stressed from a particularly grueling quarter at work, had finally relented. She'd booked a sleek, modern condo on Myrtle Beach's bustling boardwalk, part of a towering high-rise called Ocean Crest. "This is amazing, Mom," Liam exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder as they stepped into the spacious living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the sparkling ocean, the sandy beach dotted with colorful umbrellas, and the vibrant, bustling boardwalk below. Sarah smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "It's pretty great, huh, buddy? And look, our own balcony right over the water." The condo was surprisingly affordable. A steal, in fact, which had been the primary draw. Sarah, ever the shrewd businesswoman, knew a good deal when she saw one. The real estate listing had vaguely mentioned a unique history, but Sarah had brushed it aside, attributing the low price to an off-season discount or an owner desperate to sell. What she hadn't bothered to research was the dark past woven into Ocean Crest's very foundation. In 1978, the building had been the site of a horrific event. A cult called the Children of the Tide performed a ritual suicide within its walls, believing the ocean would grant them eternal life, transforming them into aquatic beings, forever free. Their leader had promised them a new existence, a watery utopia. Sarah, exhausted and desperate for a break, had ignored the fleeting rumors she'd heard, dismissing them as sensationalized local gossip. She just needed sun, sand, and quiet. Little did she know, the quiet was about to be profoundly disturbed. Their first night started with the usual vacation excitement. They swam in the condo's pool, explored the boardwalk's arcades, and ate greasy, delicious boardwalk pizza for dinner. As dusk settled, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Liam wandered onto the balcony, mesmerized by the crashing waves. Sarah was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries. "Mom, there are people out here," Liam called out, his voice tinged with a curious confusion. Sarah walked over, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "People? Liam, it's just us on this balcony. Maybe someone in another condo?" She peered out, but the neighboring balconies were empty. The boardwalk below was still lively, but no one was looking up at their high-rise. "No, not on the other balconies," Liam insisted, pointing out at the ocean. They're just standing there, looking at the water." Sarah squinted. The light was fading, making it hard to discern anything clearly on the vast expanse of the beach or the distant waves. "Honey, it's probably just the shadows playing tricks. Or maybe some late-night swimmers. Come on, let's get ready for bed." She patted his shoulder, dismissing his observation as the product of a child's overactive imagination. Liam, however, lingered for a moment, his young eyes still fixed on the unseen figures, a subtle frown on his face. Later that night, after Liam was asleep, Sarah noticed something peculiar. As she walked from the bathroom to her bedroom, she saw them, faint, wet footprints on the plush carpet. Her heart gave a little jump. "That's weird," she muttered. They were small, no bigger than Liam's, and they seemed to lead from the balcony door, across the living room, and right to the edge of the balcony railing. The balcony door was securely locked, and the sliding glass was dry. She ran her hand over the carpet, but it felt completely dry now, leaving no trace. She shrugged it off, attributing it to Liam tracking in a bit of water earlier, despite the fact he hadn't been near the balcony after swimming. A flicker of unease, though, had ignited within her. By the third night, Emma's initial dismissal had given way to a creeping dread. The wet footprints reappeared each morning, always leading to the balcony, always vanishing by midday. The subtle scent of salt and dampness, even indoors, was becoming oppressive. Sarah found herself constantly checking the locks. A new, unsettling ritual. That night, Liam's terrified scream ripped through the quiet condo. Sarah shot upright in bed, her heart leaping into her throat. "Liam, what is it?" She burst into his room, flicking on the light. Liam was huddled in the corner of his bed, trembling uncontrollably, his face pale, eyes wide with pure terror. "Mom, they were here, the guests." They were in my room, he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger towards the foot of his bed. Sarah rushed to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. Who, honey? Who was in your room? There's no one here. She scanned the empty room, her gaze lingering on the closed door, the locked window. They were standing there, Mom, all around my bed, and they were whispering, about the tide. Join us in the tide, they kept saying. Liam buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking. A cold dread seeped into Sarah's bones, much colder than the air conditioning. This wasn't just imagination. Liam was genuinely terrified, and his words echoed the very cult history she had so carelessly dismissed. It's okay, baby, she murmured, stroking his hair, but her eyes were scanning the room, her gaze fixed on the wall above his headboard. There, subtly etched into the painted drywall, were faint, swirling symbols. They looked like stylized waves, or perhaps strange, intertwined tentacles. Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. She had seen those symbols before, not in person, but in a true crime documentary years ago, detailing obscure cults. The Children of the Tide used symbols strikingly similar to these. Her blood ran cold, driven by a new, frantic desperation. Sarah grabbed her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed, Myrtle Beach Cult 1978 Ocean Crest. The search results flooded her screen, confirming her worst fears. Old newspaper articles, grainy black and white photos of the building, and police reports detailed the ritual suicide. The strange symbols, the chilling belief that the ocean would grant them eternal life. She saw images of the symbols, precisely matching those now carved into her son's bedroom wall. One article even mentioned how the cult members were found with their clothes strangely damp, despite being far from the water. Sarah slammed the laptop shut, her mind reeling. The whispers, the wet footprints, Liam's terror, the symbols, it was all terrifyingly real. They weren't just guests, they were the forgotten guests. Eternally trapped, eternally seeking new recruits for their watery afterlife. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice choked with a horror she'd never known. They're here, they're still here. Their final night was a descent into pure, unadulterated nightmare. Sarah had tried to book an earlier flight, but everything was full, every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee. But they were trapped until morning. Liam, too scared to sleep alone, was curled up in her bed, clutching her hand, both of them staring wide-eyed at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Around 2 a.m., the air in the condo grew heavy, thick with the scent of salt and decay. A sudden, jarring pop plunged the condo into darkness. The power cut out, the emergency lights in the hallway flickering on dimly, casting long, distorted shadows. Then, a new sound, chillingly distinct, filled the oppressive silence, the unmistakable sound of crashing waves. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the walls. A rhythmic, sloshing roar, as if the ocean itself was contained within the very structure of the building. Sarah gasped, pulling Liam closer. What is that? Her voice was barely a whisper. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, shadowy figures began to materialize in the periphery of their vision. They seemed to ripple and waver, like reflections on water, indistinct but undeniably present. They were everywhere, standing at the foot of the bed, by the balcony door, in the corners of the room. They were translucent, yet solid enough to block out the faint light from the hallway. And they were chanting, a low, guttural murmur at first, then growing louder, more insistent, a chilling chorus that resonated deep in their bones. Join us in the tide. Join us, eternal life, the ocean calls. The chanting grew louder, swirling around them, suffocating them. Sarah felt a coldness radiating from the figures, an almost tangible chill that seeped into her skin. Liam whimpered, burrowing deeper into her side. Mom, I'm scared, he cried, his voice trembling. Sarah's fight or flight response kicked in, overriding the paralyzing terror. She wasn't going to let them take her son. No, she screamed, her voice raw, grabbing Liam tightly. We're leaving, now. She scrambled out of bed, pulling Liam with her, stumbling over the wet carpet. The shadowy figures shifted, seemingly surrounding them, their voices rising to a fever pitch. Join us, forever, the tide awaits. Their indistinct hands, shimmering like water, seemed to reach out for them. Sarah dragged Liam towards the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her fingers numb with fear. Finally wrenching it open, they burst into the dimly lit hallway. the chanting pursuing them, echoing behind them. The elevator, Sarah gasped, pointing to the illuminated doors at the end of the hall. It was their only quick escape route down 60 floors. She jabbed the down button repeatedly. The doors slowly, agonizingly, hissed open, but what greeted them wasn't the familiar, mirrored elevator car. Instead, the entire elevator shaft seemed to be filled with swirling, dark blue water. The doors opened directly onto a horrifying vision of the ocean floor, dark, murky, filled with swaying kelp forests and ghostly, indistinct wreckage, and from the depths, skeletal hands, bone-white and elongated, reached up, their skeletal fingers beckoning, reaching directly for them. The water within the shaft pulsed with a malevolent light, and the chanting intensified, seemingly coming from the very depths of the impossible sea before them. No, Sarah screamed, slamming the close door button frantically, pulling Liam back from the abyss. The doors shuddered, then slowly began to slide shut, mercifully cutting off the horrifying vision. The stairs, now, Sarah yelled, half dragging Liam towards the emergency stairwell door. They burst through it, the heavy fire door slamming shut behind them, cutting off the chanting, though the sound of crashing waves still thrummed ominously from the walls. They plunged down the concrete stairs, flight after flight, their lungs burning, their legs aching, driven by a desperate, primal need to escape. They didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even pause to catch their breath until they burst out into the cool, pre-dawn air of the deserted parking garage. Soaked in sweat and trembling uncontrollably, they piled into their car, Sarah fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely insert it into the ignition. The engine roared to life. A blessed sound. She sped out of the garage, leaving the looming, silent high-rise behind them. They drove for hours, not stopping until the sun was fully risen and Myrtle Beach was a distant, horrifying memory. Sarah and Liam never returned to Myrtle Beach, never dared to look at a brochure for Ocean Crest again. Liam still suffered from nightmares of whispering voices and hands reaching from the deep. Sarah, though outwardly recovered, carried the chilling memory of the forgotten guests, a stark reminder of the thin veil between worlds, and the dangers of a deal that was too good to be true. Ocean Crest still stands, a sleek, modern tower against the vast ocean. It remains open for guests, seemingly normal during the day, but on certain nights, especially when the tide is high and the moon is full, guests report hearing faint, rhythmic chanting echoing from the walls, a sound like waves crashing inside the building. And sometimes, in the early morning hours, wet footprints are found on the plush carpets of its upper floors, leading to the balcony's edge, footprints that vanish completely by sunrise, leaving only the lingering scent of salt and a chilling, unexplained dampness. The forgotten guests, they say, are still there, forever bound to the tide, forever waiting for someone new to join their ranks. Story 2. The Whispering Dunes of Cape Cod. The wind howled across the dunes of Provincetown, Cape Cod, in late October 2024, carrying a bitter chill that seeped through the warped wooden walls of Driftwood Cottage. The gray-shingled beach house, perched precariously on the edge of the sandy expanse, groaned under the weight of its own history, a skeletal presence against the turbulent sky. Emma Carter, a 32-year-old journalist from Boston, had rented it for a month, seeking solitude to finish her overdue novel. A psychological thriller that ironically was proving far less unsettling than her current reality. She'd envisioned crisp, inspiring mornings and quiet, productive nights. What she found was a decaying monument to neglect, with its dark, salt-streaked windows that seemed to weep brine, and a porch that sagged like a tired old man's shoulders. The cottage was a far cry from the charming Airbnb photos. The online images had promised rustic charm and unparalleled tranquility. What Emma got was potential tetanus and creepy isolation. Still, Emma, ever the skeptic, a woman who dealt in facts and verifiable truths, brushed off its undeniably eerie aura. It's just an old house. Emma, she muttered to herself, her voice echoing a little too loudly in the hollow space, as she unpacked her trusty laptop and a half-full bottle of Merlot. Provincetown's off-season quiet had been the main draw, fewer tourists, more focus, no distractions from her deadline, or so she desperately hoped. The silence, however, was already proving to be a louder, more unsettling presence than any city noise. That first night, the silence was shattered only by the relentless hammering of the wind. Emma sat cross-legged on the lumpy couch, its springs groaning in protest, typing furiously. The clatter of her keys was a comforting rhythm, a tangible connection to her work, to her sanity. She was deep in a scene, her fictional characters locked in a tense confrontation, when around midnight, a strange sound cut through her concentration, a faint, rhythmic murmur, like voices whispering just beyond the dunes, just outside the thin walls. Her fingers froze mid-sentence, hovering over the keys, the cursor blinking impatiently on the screen. Her heart gave a sudden, unsettling lurch. It wasn't the wind, not a creaking branch. It was distinct, melodic, almost human. Emma, Emma, the sound curled around her name. Soft as sea foam, yet insidious, like a silken thread trying to entangle her. It felt as if someone was breathing her name directly into her ear. Though she was utterly alone. A prickle of unease snaked up her spine. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's shriek. She strained her ears, listening intently, convinced it was some drunk college kids, or perhaps local teenagers pulling a prank. With a surge of adrenaline that defied her growing fear, she yanked open the front door, ready to confront them, ready to deliver a stern, journalistically honed lecture about disturbing the peace. But the dunes stretched empty under a thin, sickle moon, vast and silent save for the ceaseless groan of the wind. Their shadows twisted like skeletal fingers across the undulating sand, menacing and stark. No footprints in the sand, no muffled laughter, no retreating figures, nothing. The emptiness was more terrifying than any presence. City nerves, Emma, she scoffed, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle and forced even to her own ears. Your wound too tight, just the wind playing tricks. She slammed the door shut, the resounding thud echoing ominously in the quiet cottage. She tried to return to her novel, to lose herself in the familiar world of words. But the sentences blurred on the screen. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The phantom whispers echoing in her dreams, morphing into a distorted chorus that chased her through endless, shifting dunes, always just out of reach. She tossed and turned, tangled in her sheets, her initial skepticism already beginning to fray. By the third night, Emma was a wreck. The murmurs had grown bolder, weaving into words that sent genuine shivers down her spine, chilling her to the bone. Stay, forever? We're waiting. They slithered through the walls, through the very floorboards, louder and more insistent when she sat near the windows facing the dunes. As if the sand itself was speaking directly to her. Emma's skepticism, once her steadfast shield, had cracked, shattered like old glass, her nerves fraying like the cottage's peeling paint. She felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling awareness that something profoundly unnatural was happening. She paced the small living room, a mug of lukewarm coffee clutched in her trembling hands. She'd been on a caffeine IV drip for the past 24 hours. The bitter liquid doing little to calm her racing heart. She tried to focus on her novel, desperate to lose herself in its familiar narrative, to anchor herself in reality. But her character's dialogue morphed into pleas to join the sands. Every sentence she typed seemed to twist into a dark invitation, a haunting echo of the voices outside. She'd type, "He looked out at the churning sea," and her screen would flash. The sea calls, but the sand waits. Her hands trembled violently as she deleted the insidious words, only for them to reappear, unbidden, on the screen moments later. The cottage felt colder, despite the ancient heating system rattling to life, and the air seemed to hum with an unseen, malevolent energy, desperate for a reality check, for a rational explanation from a local who knew this strange place. She trudged next door to Tom Haskell's weathered shack, the 45-year-old fisherman, a man whose face was etched with the lines of sun and sea, was gutting cod on his porch, his calloused hands moving with grim, practiced precision. The sight of his weathered, practical movements was a small comfort, a tether to the mundane world she felt slipping away. The smell of brine and fresh fish was a welcome assault on her senses after the oppressive silence of the cottage. "Tom, you hear weird noises out here at night?" Emma asked, hugging her jacket tighter against the biting wind, trying to keep her voice steady. She hoped he'd laugh, tell her it was just the gulls, or the old pipes. Her voice, however, came out strained, tighter than she intended. Tom's gray eyes, old and deep like the ocean, flicked up, wary, a knowing glint in them that made her stomach clench. He didn't seem surprised by her question, which only heightened her apprehension. He just slowly wiped his bloodied knife on a rag, his gaze holding an unsettling understanding. Whispers, you mean? His voice was low, gravelly, like he'd swallowed half the ocean. A voice that had seen and heard much. A voice that carried the weight of generations of local knowledge. Emma swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Yes, exactly. It's unsettling, like voices calling my name. Tom nodded slowly, his expression grim, not a hint of humor in his eyes. That's the Dunes Whisperer. Been here longer than any of us. Longer than this town, probably. He said it with a quiet certainty that chilled Emma to the bone. Dismissing her skepticism with a single, ancient truth, Emma forced a brittle laugh. A desperate, almost hysterical sound. Come on, Tom, that's just tourist bait, a local legend for the gullible. You're trying to scare me. She tried to sound dismissive, but her voice cracked at the end. Tom didn't smile. He pointed the gleaming blade of his knife directly toward Driftwood Cottage, its tip catching the pale afternoon light. In '87, the Millers stayed there. Family of 4, came from Ohio, I think, real quiet folks. One morning, they were just gone. House was locked up tight, everything neat as a pin. But their footprints led straight into the dunes, clear as day, and no tracks came out. Search parties looked for weeks, months even, nothing, not a trace. Locals don't rent that place no more. It sits empty most of the time now. It's got a reputation. Emma's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot of dread. Her journalistic mind, trained to seek facts, rebelled, but a primal fear began to gnaw at her. She tried to dismiss it, tried to conjure up a logical explanation, a sudden, unannounced departure, a family emergency, anything but what Tom was implying. Still, she rolled her eyes, a gesture of desperate defiance against the growing terror. I'm not buying your ghost story. Tom, there must be a logical explanation. Maybe they just left. Unexpectedly, they didn't want to be found. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture, turning back to his fish. His broad back a silent testament to his conviction. Don't gotta buy it, Emma, just don't go walking them dunes at night. Not when the whispers are strong. His words hung in the biting air. A chilling warning carried on the wind. A warning she knew, deep down, she should heed. Back at the cottage, the weight of Tom's words pressed down on Emma. Heavy and cold, she tried to shake them off. Tried to convince herself it was all a confluence of coincidence. An overactive imagination, a local myth designed to entertain and perhaps deter curious outsiders. But the whispers outside the window grew relentless. No longer just murmurs but now forming full, insidious sentences, clear as day. The dunes are calling. You belong here? Join us. It's peaceful here. They slithered through the cracks in the walls, pressed against the windows, a suffocating, almost physical presence. Her laptop, usually a source of comfort and control, her gateway to the rational world, betrayed her that night. She had finally succumbed to exhaustion, drifting off into a restless, nightmare-ridden sleep on the lumpy couch. At 3 a.m., she woke with a jolt, her eyes snapping open. The room was bathed in an eerie, pulsing blue light. Her laptop screen, which she had meticulously shut down, had flickered to life. There, emblazoned in stark, white text on the cold blue glow, was a single line she hadn't typed, couldn't have typed, a line that seemed to burn itself into her retinas. The dunes are calling. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated terror. She slammed the laptop shut with a violent shudder, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. The screen went dark, but the words were seared into her mind. She scrambled to her feet, her gaze darting around the room, and began frantically checking every lock on every window and door, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, as if physical barriers could somehow keep out the ethereal, unseen threat. The air felt thick, gritty, like sand had crept into her lungs, making it hard to breathe. Each inhale a struggle. A fine layer of pale dust seemed to cling to everything, the furniture, the curtains, even her clothes, despite the cottage having been meticulously cleaned when she arrived. She could feel the grittiness under her bare feet, a constant, abrasive reminder of the encroaching outside. She poured more wine, her hand shaking so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim of the glass, staining the cheap wooden table. Get it together, Emma, she muttered to herself, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper. It's just stress. You're tired, you're letting your imagination run wild. It's an old house, old wiring, but the cottage seemed alive. groaning and creaking with malicious intent. Its sounds mimicking footsteps just outside her door. Then inside, just behind her, its shadows pooled in corners like spilled ink, shifting and writhing in her peripheral vision, taking on grotesque shapes. Every sound, every shadow, every grain of sand conspired against her, fueling her growing panic. She pulled a blanket tighter around her, seeking refuge, but the chill seemed to come from within, a cold dread that permeated her very bones. On her fifth night, Emma woke abruptly, a blood-curdling gasp tearing from her throat. She had been dreaming, a nightmare so vivid it still clung to her like a shroud. Its tendrils wrapped around her mind. In the dream, the front door stood wide open, and sand poured across the hardwood floor like an unstoppable tide, engulfing everything, burying her alive. But this wasn't a dream. Her eyes snapped open. The room was cold, unnaturally cold. A gust of wind, smelling of salt and damp earth, swept through the cottage. The front door was wide open, gaping like a hungry mouth into the moonlit night, and a steady stream of fine, pale sand was indeed pouring across the hardwood floor, forming a rapidly growing dune inside her living room. It was already knee-deep in places, a soft, encroaching tide that swallowed furniture legs and spread like a cancerous growth. The whispers were no longer faint, they were a chorus now. A deafening, terrifying cacophony of voices, all chanting the same hypnotic words, amplified by the wind that tore through the open door, tugging at her mind, pulling at her very soul. You belong to us, you belong to us, come to us, come home. The voices were countless, overlapping, yet strangely harmonious, like a choir of forgotten souls. She stumbled out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the cold, shifting sand that already covered the floor, feeling the individual grains pressing against her skin. A strange, almost irresistible urge to step outside, to walk into the moonlit embrace of the dunes, pulsed through her veins. It was a siren song, a chilling invitation, promising peace, promising belonging, promising oblivion. She felt a magnetic pull, a powerful force drawing her towards the open doorway. No, she screamed, the word ripped from her throat, raw and desperate, a defiant roar against the unseen force. She stumbled towards the door, fighting against the strange, internal pull, her muscles straining, her mind screaming for escape. With a guttural cry, she slammed the door shut, the impact shaking the old house to its foundations. Then, with trembling hands, she dragged the heavy wooden armchair, the same one she'd sat on for hours, to barricade it, wedging it firmly under the doorknob. But the sand kept coming, relentless and unstoppable. It seeped through microscopic cracks in the doorframe, under the baseboards, through unseen gaps in the walls, piling against the barriers with an unnerving determination. It felt alive, a relentless, creeping force, filling the room, consuming her space. Her phone, which she frantically grabbed, had no signal. The Wi-Fi was dead, the router's lights dark, cutting her off from the outside world, leaving her utterly isolated, trapped in a house that was slowly being devoured. Panic clawed at her chest, a suffocating hand squeezing her lungs, stealing her breath. She was alone, completely alone, with whatever this was, as the sand continued its relentless invasion, piling higher and higher against the door and walls. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a terrifying vision. In the swirling grains before her, illuminated by the cold moonlight filtering through the salt-crusted windows, a figure began to form, a vague, humanoid shape, shimmering and indistinct, composed entirely of fine, pale sand. It coalesced from the chaotic swirl, solidifying into a terrifying, silent sentinel. Its voice was no longer a whisper but a guttural hiss, a sound that grated on her nerves, echoing deep within her bones, seeming to emanate from the very air around her. Stay, forever? You cannot leave? Leave me alone, Emma yelled, her voice hoarse with terror and desperation, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed a broom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it, and began frantically sweeping the sand back towards the door, trying to push back the impossible. But it was futile. The sand swirled, defiant, reforming the figure even as she swept, mocking her desperate efforts. It seemed to grow larger, more defined, its presence filling the small room, its sandy hands reaching towards her, spectral and terrifying, promising to pull her into its gritty embrace. She sank to her knees, the cold sand seeping into her skin, chilling her to the marrow, mixing with the hot tears on her face. The cottage groaned around her, a deep, resonant sound like it was collapsing, its ancient timbers protesting the supernatural intrusion. Or perhaps, simply giving up. "I'm not staying," she sobbed, clutching her car keys so tightly the plastic dug into her palm. The cold metal a small, tangible comfort in her hand. She had to get out. She had to escape. The figure loomed closer, its sandy hands reaching, its form rippling like a mirage. Emma scrambled to her feet, her legs burning with a sudden surge of adrenaline, fueled by a primal need for survival. She bolted for the back door, her only other exit, tripping over sand that seemed to grab at her ankles, pulling her down, deliberately trying to entangle her. She scrambled outside, falling onto the small, neglected porch, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her lungs burning. The whispers exploded behind her, chasing her like a swarm of angry bees, buzzing in her ears, her name echoing in the night, plaintive and possessive. "Emma, Emma, don't leave us, you are ours." The dunes, under the chilling, indifferent glow of the full moon, seemed to pulse with an unearthly light, their massive curves beckoning like a lover's embrace. A silent, deadly invitation to oblivion. She could hear the voices distinctively now, 1,000 hungry whispers calling her name from within the sand itself. She reached her car, her hands shaking so violently she fumbled the keys, dropping them into the fine, ever-present sand. With a desperate sob, a sound torn from the deepest part of her being, she scooped them up, her fingers numb with cold and fear. She jammed the key into the ignition, twisted it violently. The engine roared to life, a sound that was sweeter than any symphony, a beacon of hope. She slammed the car into reverse and sped down the gravel road, kicking up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the terrifying sight behind her. She didn't dare to look back, didn't dare to glance at the dark, beckoning shapes of the dunes, or the ominous, sand-choked cottage receding in her rearview mirror. The whispers, however, still seemed to follow, a faint, lingering echo in her mind. At dawn, Emma pulled into a small, brightly lit diner at the edge of Provincetown, her face pale, drawn, and haunted, her hair dusted with fine, pale sand, her eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting a terror that ran deeper than exhaustion. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile that spoke of years spent watching the peculiar tide of humanity in this strange town, poured her a fresh cup of coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. "You stayed at Driftwood, didn't you, dear?" the waitress said softly, her voice filled with a quiet understanding that sent another shiver down Emma's spine. There was no judgment, only a deep, unsettling empathy. Emma nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with unshed tears and the lingering terror that clung to her like the fine sand on her clothes. She just clutched the warm mug, letting the heat seep into her trembling hands. "You're lucky," the waitress said, her gaze steady, her voice barely a whisper. "Most don't leave, not once the dunes truly start calling." She placed a plate of pancakes in front of Emma, but the journalist could only stare at them, her appetite long gone. Emma drove back to Boston that day, a blur of highway and gray sky. She abandoned her novel, the manuscript left on her now sand-filled laptop. She abandoned the cottage, leaving a month of rent unpaid and a lease unfulfilled. She never looked back, never returned to Cape Cod. She rarely even drove close to the coast again. Locals say Driftwood Cottage still stands, its windows dark and empty, its porch now almost entirely buried in sand, a silent sentinel on the edge of the whispering dunes. And on windy nights, when the moon hangs low over the sandy expanse, the dunes whisper names of those who dared to stay. And sometimes, if you listen closely, they call for Emma. They are always calling. Story 3. The Lighthouse Keeper's Curse. The relentless roar of the Pacific Ocean was the first thing Lucas Reed registered. A constant, low thrum against the rugged cliffs of the Oregon coast. It was late June 2025, and Lucas, a 28-year-old Portland-based photographer, had envisioned this getaway with his girlfriend, Maya Chen, 27, a vibrant graphic designer, as the perfect blend of romance and artistic inspiration. Their quaint beach house, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning sea, certainly offered unparalleled views. It was a charming, if somewhat weathered, structure with wide windows that framed the iconic Heceta Head Lighthouse, its white tower standing sentinel against the dramatic backdrop. "Isn't it breathtaking, Lucas?" Maya exclaimed, her voice bright with enthusiasm as she stepped onto the small, wind-swept porch. pulling her denim jacket tighter against the cool sea breeze. Her bright blue scarf, a stark contrast to the muted grays and greens of the landscape, billowed around her. Lucas, already setting up his tripod, grinned, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. It's incredible, honey. Perfect light for some long exposures. Maybe capture a bit of that moody Oregon magic. He loved how Maya always found the beauty in everything. A stark contrast to his more pragmatic, almost analytical approach to the world. What they hadn't fully grasped from the online listing was the house's grim history. It was built on the very site of the original keeper's quarters. A place where, in 1873, a lighthouse keeper named Captain Elias Morrow had drowned his wife in a fit of madness before vanishing without a trace into the unforgiving sea. Locals still avoided the property, whispering tales of the captain's ghost, claiming he haunted the very ground, eternally searching for his lost love. Lucas, ever the pragmatist, had dismissed it as local folklore, charming but irrelevant. Maya, while less cynical, simply hadn't given it much thought. Too enchanted by the crashing waves and the majestic lighthouse. Their first night began idyllically. They cooked a simple pasta dinner, shared a bottle of local Pinot Noir, and watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. As dusk deepened, Lucas, camera in hand, ventured out onto the porch to capture the lighthouse beam cutting through the deepening twilight. Maya, meanwhile, was curled up on the ancient, floral-patterned couch inside, sketching in her notebook, enjoying the rhythmic sound of the waves. Lucas peered through his camera lens, adjusting the focus. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark expanse of the ocean, a steady, comforting rhythm. But then, as he reviewed a few of the initial shots on his camera's display, his brow furrowed. That's odd, he murmured to himself. Scattered across the digital images, hovering eerily in the air near the lighthouse tower, were faint, translucent orbs of light. They weren't lens flares, he knew his equipment. They shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence. Just dust motes. Probably, he tried to rationalize, though his photographer's instinct screamed otherwise. He took more shots, trying to isolate the phenomenon. But they persisted, dancing in and out of the frame. Inside, Maya paused her sketching. A faint sound had caught her ear, a soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from directly above them. Her eyes darted towards the ceiling. Lucas, is that you in the attic? She called out, though she knew he was outside. No answer. The attic door, she remembered, was in the hallway, secured with an old, rusty padlock. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps continued, deliberate and unsettling. A shiver ran down her spine. Hello? She called again, her voice a little higher this time. The footsteps stopped abruptly. Silence descended, broken only by the ocean's roar. Maya shook her head. Must be the wind. Old houses make noises, she whispered to herself, trying to dismiss the unsettling sound. But her hand trembled as she resumed sketching. The comfortable silence had been replaced by a lingering sense of unease. The second night, the quaint charm of the beach house began to curdle into something more sinister. Lucas spent the afternoon reviewing his photographs from the previous night, zooming in on the mysterious orbs. They seemed to pulse, almost as if alive, and in some, he could discern faint, elongated shapes within them, like distorted faces caught in glass. Later that evening, he was sifting through the day's fresh captures of the dramatic coastline. He'd snapped several panoramic shots of the cliffs that stretched out towards the lighthouse, hoping for a striking composition. As he scrolled through them, a particular image made his blood run cold. On the distant, jagged edge of the cliffs, where only crashing waves should be, stood a figure, a shadowy, indistinct shape, but undeniably human. It wore what looked like an old-fashioned sailor's coat, and though its face was obscured by shadow and distance, Lucas felt an unnerving sense that it was staring directly back at him. At the house, he felt a chill despite the warmth of the living room fire. Maya, come look at this, he said, his voice unusually strained. He pointed to the figure on his camera screen. Maya peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening. What is that? Her voice was barely a whisper. Is it a person? I don't know. I didn't see anyone out there when I took the shot. And it's too dark for anyone to be walking there safely. Lucas tried to zoom in further, but the image became pixelated, the figure dissolving into an indistinguishable blur of shadow. Yet, the distinct outline remained in his memory, and the chilling feeling that it was watching them. while Lucas was engrossed with his unsettling photos. Maya, her nerves already frayed from the previous night's phantom footsteps, had been feeling an escalating sense of dread. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. She found herself drawn to a dusty, built-in bookshelf near the fireplace, as if an invisible hand guided her. Her fingers brushed against a loose panel behind a collection of maritime novels. Curiosity, and a growing sense of foreboding, compelled her to pry it open. Inside the hidden compartment lay a single, leather-bound logbook, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. Its cover, faded and cracked, bore the embossed initials, E.M. Captain Elias Morrow. Maya's hands trembled as she opened it. The cramped, looping handwriting detailed a descent into madness. The entries grew increasingly frantic, filled with chilling prose about the unforgiving sea, the crushing isolation, and a growing obsession that the ocean itself was a living entity, demanding a sacrifice. The waves whisper her name. An entry from 1872 read, "They crave her, they demand tribute." A later entry, dated just days before his disappearance in 1873, "She resists the true calling, but the sea will have what is owed. She stays with me, forever bound to the currents." Maya's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The Dunes Whisperer from Emma's story flashed through her mind. The grim warning from Tom Haskell. This was no charming local legend. This was real. "Lucas," she called out, her voice a thin, reedy sound, her eyes wide with terror. "Lucas, you have to see this. Oh my God, you have to see this." She held out the logbook, its dark words seeming to pulsate in the dim light. Lucas took the book, his eyes scanning the frantic entries. The chilling words, combined with his own unsettling photographs, began to chip away at his rational defenses. "She stays with me, Maya. This is," he trailed off, unable to articulate the profound horror he felt. His mind, trained to observe and categorize, was struggling to process the impossible. The shadowy figure on the cliff, the orbs, the footsteps, and now, this logbook. It was all converging. "It's him, Lucas," Maya whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's Captain Morrow. He drowned his wife here. And he thinks the sea demanded it. He thinks she belongs to it. To him." A shiver of primal fear shot through Lucas. "We need to get out of here. Now." Their last night was a waking nightmare. They had tried to leave, but a sudden, violent storm had rolled in, trapping them. The wind shrieked like a banshee, tearing at the house, and the rain lashed against the windows. A relentless assault. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind, was amplified into a symphony of dread. They huddled together on the living room floor, unable to sleep, wrapped in blankets, clutching each other for comfort. The logbook lying ominously on the coffee table between them. Around 3 a.m., a new, terrifying sound cut through the storm's fury, a soft, gurgling slosh, then a distinct, cold wetness against Lucas's bare feet. He gasped, sitting bolt upright. What is that?" The floor was slick, freezing water, dark and murky, was seeping in from under the walls, pouring through cracks in the old floorboards, rapidly flooding the house. It wasn't a pipe burst, there was no discernible source, no ruptured sound, it just came. The water rose swiftly, covering their ankles, then their shins, swirling around them with an insidious current. It smelled of salt and decaying seaweed, a smell that filled their lungs, suffocating them. A deep, guttural voice, dripping with icy malice, growled from seemingly everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing from the rising water itself. "She stays with me," Maya screamed, a raw, terrified sound, as she tried to scramble away from the encroaching flood. She felt an icy grip on her left wrist, sharp and unyielding, as if a hand made of frozen kelp had seized her. It pulled her, with terrifying strength, towards the main front door, which slowly, agonizingly, began to creak open, revealing the tumultuous, storm-lashed darkness outside. "No, Lucas," she shrieked, struggling against the invisible grasp, her eyes wide with panic. The water was now waist-deep, swirling violently, tugging at her clothes, threatening to pull her under. Lucas, galvanized by her terror, reacted with a desperate, primal instinct. He lunged across the room, ignoring the icy water that fought against him. Grabbing a heavy, antique brass lamp, with a desperate yell, he swung it, smashing it with all his might against the large picture window facing the ocean. Glass exploded outwards in a shower of glittering shards, letting in a gust of frigid, wet wind and the deafening roar of the storm. "Grab my hand, Maya," he yelled, reaching for her. His voice strained. He pulled her with all his might, fighting against the unseen force that still clung to her wrist, just as he dragged her through the jagged opening in the window. The powerful beam of the Heceta Head Lighthouse, usually a steady comfort, flickered erratically, casting an intermittent, stark white light across the shattered glass. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, framed in the broken pane, Lucas saw it, a gaunt, spectral face, eyes burning with a desperate, ancient madness, thin lips twisted into a silent, possessive snarl. Captain Elias Morrow, he was there, watching. They tumbled out onto the soaking ground outside, landing hard amidst the thorny rose bushes, the water from the house pouring out behind them like a vengeful tide. Lucas scrambled to his feet, pulling Maya with him, their clothes soaked, shivering uncontrollably, their hearts pounding in their chests like war drums. They didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to gather belongings. They simply ran, sprinting blindly through the driving rain, along the slippery, cliffside path, away from the house, away from the lighthouse, away from the screaming wind and the possessive, growling voice that echoed in their minds. They didn't even attempt to get into their car, which sat ominously near the property. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs gave out, until they found themselves stumbling onto the main road, soaked and traumatized. They never returned to Heceta Head, never dared to even look at a photograph of the lighthouse again. Lucas abandoned his photography for months, unable to look at a lens without seeing that gaunt face. Maya suffered from recurring nightmares of drowning, of icy hands reaching for her. The experience left an indelible scar, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between worlds. But visitors to Heceta Head Lighthouse still report strange occurrences near the old beach house. On stormy nights, when the wind howls and the waves crash against the cliffs, a faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump can sometimes be heard from the locked attic. And occasionally, late at night, a woman's silhouette, indistinct and sorrowful, is seen in the beach house windows, staring out to sea, forever waiting, forever bound. The whispers, they say, still echo on the wind, calling for those who dare to listen, and sometimes, for those who choose to stay. If you find the story interesting, please like and share this video and leave a comment with your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Revenge and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos.